This is a little bit funny, but we'll see how it goes. I have 4 stories for you to start off with. You might remember this story. The photograph comes from the BBC's lovely production of Louisa May Alcott's classic story, Little Women. And there's Marmee in the middle, and there's her daughters, Meg and Jo and Amy and Beth. And next door to them lives Laurie, and from his cold, silent home where he lives with his grandfather, he watches through the windows the March family, and he sees the warmth and delight they have in one another. He sees them, how they behave, and he watches the girls as they grow up. He sees the good things and the bad. He sees Amy burn Jo's manuscript and everything that happens. And what he sees, and what Louisa May Alcott is so good at describing, is a family. The love and strength and beauty of a family and their affection for one another. It's a great story. This picture comes from The Princess Bride, and there's Wesley, or the farm boy, and Princess Buttercup, and they're standing in a field all lit with sunlight, and Princess Buttercup says, "But I'm afraid I'll never see you again." And Wesley says to her, "But this is true love. Do you think this happens every day?" Well, actually, Wesley, it does. It happens every day, all the time. Human beings fall in love. It's a human experience. A romantic love between a man and a woman who look at one another and decide, of all the other men in the world, this is the one that I love and the one that I want. That's a lovely romantic love. Lots of songs and stories about it. This lady's called Gerda Mckenna, and she had a terrible time with breast cancer. Just awful. And when it got near its worst and she was headed for another long battle, she decided that she wanted to take with her into hospital a beautiful photograph of all the friends that had been very supportive to her. So she contacted them all and arranged for them to meet somewhere to have a photo shoot with them. And on the day they arrived, this is what Gerda saw. All of her friends, in solidarity with her, out of their great love and affection for her, had shaved their heads so that she didn't seem quite so strange and different from them. A beautiful image in there of the love that people have as friends and the deep commitment they have to bearing with one another through good times and hard times. And this is a hard photo even to look at. It's a real photo, that's why it's of such scratchy quality, of prisoners of war in a Japanese internment camp on the River Kwai. Ernest Gordon wrote a book called Miracle on the River Kwai, and in that book he tells this story. A squadron of Scottish soldiers were taken out working on a railway every day, and the Japanese soldiers who guarded them were particularly cruel. And on one occasion they went out and they dug all day, and at the end they were packing up to return, and they counted the shovels and one was missing. And the guard became convinced that one of the prisoners had stolen a shovel. And he was enraged. He lined them all up and demanded that the person who'd stolen the shovel step forward. And nobody moved. So he pulled out a gun and said that he was going to shoot them all. And they had every reason to believe him. He'd done things like that before. And finally, one man stepped forward and took the blame. And in his fury, the captain of the guard, the Japanese guard, threw down his gun and picked up a shovel, and he beat that man to death. And when it was all over, the rest of the squadron picked up his corpse and they carried it all back to the camp. And there was another check before they went in the camp, and they counted the shovels again. And there wasn't one missing at all. It had just been a miscount. Now, the story of what happened swept like wildfire through that camp, and it had an extraordinary effect. The men all knew that someone thought they were worth dying for. Someone had died for them. And so it changed the way they treated one another. And Ernest Gordon says they began to treat one another like brothers. The real depth of that change was only revealed a couple of months later when the Allies swept through and there was victory. And those skeletal men were suddenly in charge of the camp. And they lined up in front of them all those guards who'd been incredibly cruel to them. And instead of seeking revenge, they all said, "No more hatred, no more killing. No more torture." One of them stepped forward and said, "What we need now is forgiveness." A profound change in a community of people because someone loved enough to die for them. Extraordinary things. C.S. Lewis wrote a great book called The Four Loves. Storge, family love, a beautiful family. Eros, romantic love. Philios, the love of friendship, like Jesus and his disciples, and agape, like the love God has for us. If you're going to preach a sermon about love, my guess is that everyone at Boonah Church of Christ knows what passage of the Bible we're going to be looking at. Most of you would know. And of course, it's 1 Corinthians 13. So we're going to read it. And when we do, you'll notice that the first part that I read is not actually from chapter 13. It's the last sentence of chapter 12, just the last sentence. And then we're going to read chapter 13. In chapter 12, Paul has been writing about spiritual gifts. And he talks about them all and compares them all. And he gets to the end of it and he says, you should set your hearts on the highest spiritual gifts, but what I will show you is the highest way of all. And some translations say, I will show you the most excellent way. And then this great chapter begins. He says, if I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but do not have love, I'm only a clanging gong, a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I'm nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship, that I may boast, but I do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it does not dishonour others, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. But where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. For now, we see only a reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part. Then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And now these three remain: faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love. Beautiful, extraordinary words. And whenever we study a passage in the Bible, we give you a bit of a background and an introduction. We cover some important points, the author. And this is Paul. He's writing to the church in Corinth. He travelled around on his missionary journey. He came to Corinth, a big, important trading city. He stayed there for about 1.5 years, and you can read about that in the book of Acts, chapter 18. And then he moved on and he travelled to other cities, and other people came through and did some work in the church at Corinth. And eventually Paul starts getting reports about them, and the reports say that there's real problems in the church at Corinth. There's disunity, there's immorality, there's problems with food that's been sacrificed to idols, there's problems in their communion feasts, they called them love feasts back then, or the communion meal. There's problems with their spiritual gifts, there's a lot of rivalry in the church. And so Paul writes them some letters, and 1 Corinthians is the first letter that he wrote to them. There are 4 parts in it, and today I'm only going to look at the first 2, which kind of sets me up for a sequel, doesn't it? But just the first 2. And there's this little tiny introduction, that sentence at the end of chapter 12, that says, a most excellent way. And then there are parts of the passage. In the second part, he talks about the importance of love, which we'll look at today. He goes on to give a definition and a description of what love is like. And then he talks at the end about the permanence of love. So as you read through this chapter, and I hope you will through the week, you might notice those changes when it moves from those separate discussions. We're going to look at that little intro at the beginning and at his ideas about the importance of love. You see, there are problems in the church at Corinth, and the first one he mentions, and the one that he goes on to mention as he talks about all the others, is a problem of disunity. he says that people describe themselves as, oh, I follow Paul, or I follow Apollos, or I follow Peter. And they're torn apart. And there's this same disunity in their relationships. It's tearing people apart. There's disunity in the way they function as a church. They come together for worship, but there's wealthy people who have much and poor people who go away hungry. There's disunity in the way they treat food sacrificed to idols. Some feel free to eat it and some feel not free, and so there's this disunity. There's disunity in their spiritual gifts and the way they exercise them. They had them. And then there was people ranking them and saying which ones were worth more. And so Paul is dealing with all of this stuff in this central chapter, chapter 13, a better way, a more excellent way than the way you're currently functioning in all of these areas. This body of teaching about love is foundational to what he says in all the other chapters up until now. And he's talking about a loving unity in the church. He's talking about how we should treat one another. Of the 4 Greek words for love, storge, the family love, eros, the romantic love, philios, the love of great friendship, and agape, that self-sacrificing, undeserved, unfailing, unconditional love like God has for us. I wonder if you can guess which word it is that's used in this passage in 1 Corinthians 13, a famous passage about love. Which of those 4 Greek words? It's not storge, eros, or philios. It's the word agape. It's that self-sacrificing, undeserved, unfailing, and unconditional love that God has for us is what he's saying we should have for one another. And then he goes on to talk about how ministry in the church would be if we did it without any love. He said, even if you have the best spiritual gifts around, even if you have gifts of tongues, if you spoke the tongues of not just ordinary tongues, but of men and of angels, if you had prophecy so you understood all the mysteries, if you had all the knowledge in the world, if you had a faith powerful enough to shift mountains, if you sacrificed to the extent of giving all you possessed, even giving up your life to the poor, but if you did it without love, you're just like a clanging gong. You're like a noisy cymbal. You're making a lot of noise, but you're not doing anything that has real value to God. Now, what does that mean for us now? So as I read it, I think to myself, I could come into Boonah Church and preach. I could walk in the door, preach a sermon and walk out. I could never call anyone here, never care, never pray, never visit, never have anything else to do with you. I could walk in and do it and walk out. I could do all of the things that are ministries in our church. I could run the Bible studies and cell groups. I could run the Grumpies. I could run Ray of Sunshine ministries. I could be like all those people who work in Days for Girls or go over and do mission work that our church is part of and supports. I could do the admin work of an elder or a deacon, all those supporting work in the church. I could walk in, do it, and walk out. And what this is saying to me is that if I do that without any love, it's just meaningless. Now, that's an odd thing for him to say. Why should that be? Why should it be meaningless? If I exercise the gift of tongues or of prophecy, why can I not walk into the church, deliver a prophecy, and walk out without caring about them at all? Why would that not work? Let's say the prophecy is that we should start up a church in Calva. I should be able to walk in, say, God says we should start up a church in Calva, and walk out. Why would it be meaningless if I did that without love? Because the love is the message. Because that's what it's all about. Because who you are and what you say have to match. They have to meet one another. They have to be saying the same thing in the world. The message of God isn't just words, but it's life too. There's that old saying that I found credited to lots of different people, including Francis of Assisi, but lots of others as well, that says preach. Preach at all times and where necessary use words. Let your life be the message that we preach to the world. And it has to be full of love. It has to be full of love for each person that we interact with and minister to. And the basis of it all is love, or else it's just meaningless. Jesus gave us a parable in Luke 18 about 2 men who went up to the temple to pray. One was a Pharisee. And he stood near the altar at the front of the church, and he looked up and he said, "Oh, I thank you, God, that I'm not like other people. I thank you that I'm this great, fantastic person. I do everything that you ask of me and more. I don't just fast once a day, I fast twice a week, and I fast all the time, and I give to the poor, and I pray a great deal. I thank you that I'm not like horrible, worthless, greedy, terrible people. You're so lucky to have me on your team, God. Thank you that I'm not like this awful man here, this tax collector. Everybody knows him. Everybody knows how bad he is. Thank you for what I am. And he's so pleased with himself. And if you look at it in one sense, one of these two men does good. He does all that's good. He goes beyond the law in terms of righteousness. And the other doesn't. The other's a failure. He's a tax collector, one of the most despised people. One of them, says Jesus, went home justified with God, and one of them did not. And it's not who it looks like. Man looks on the outward appearance, but God looks on the heart. All that Pharisee did, all the stuff that he did was not valuable to God. He was as meaningless as a clanging gong. He didn't love God and love other people. He loved himself. He thought God was lucky to have him. That's how he prayed. What the parable says lines up with what Paul writes in his first letter to the Corinthians. If you do all this good stuff, but the foundation of it isn't in love, it doesn't have value to God or to other people. So why would we be talking about this at such a time as we face the COVID-19 coronavirus? I guess it's because I know you. I know the church at Boonah. I know the people in the Philippines who listen to these messages. I know you. In a time like this, you will reach out and help. You will do things. I know you will. You do it all the time. It's what our church is like. It's one of the things we're really good at. And the foundation of all that service has to be love. It has to be agape love, like the love God has for us. Or else it's just meaningful, clanging gong sort of action without value to God. If we were to write 1 Corinthians chapter 13 for 2020, it might read like this, just the first section of it. Without love, service is nothing. If I do impressive church work, if I give up all my toilet rolls, if I cook food and deliver it to the poor, if I go and work at the retirement village, even if I work without pay, even if I get the virus myself and get really sick and then die, but I have no love for other people when I do it, it's as meaningless as a bumper sticker that says, honk if you love Jesus. The coronavirus will change the world. It will change the way human beings live in the world. So will agape love. So will service that we do that is characterized by that love, that real commitment to every individual person that we interact with. It happened on the River Kwai amongst that Scottish squadron of soldiers. They were utterly changed because someone loved them like that. And if we do that in our communities as this coronavirus affects us, that will have a permanent effect, a profound effect on the people who are watching how we live. And it will have value in the judgment of God. So I thought I'd give you a couple of do's and don'ts, 3 do's and 2 don'ts for the weeks to come, which I think will be profound weeks in the history of humanity on the earth. 1 is watch the euthanasia debate. I think what's happening with the coronavirus is going to push that. I see the stories about doctors who make a decision where they have limited resources, and we have this person and this person, and who will we give the resources to? Who will we save? And that fuels the debate about euthanasia. And we may easily forget that God says each person is of value to him, and that we are not the people deciding when others live or die. It's a very tricky area. So I think it behoves us to watch that debate. The second thing is go out and do service. Don't lock yourself up inside so utterly that you never connect with other people, that you never reach out in love and do what you can do. By all means, stay at home, as we've been ordered to do, but reach out to people, find ways of doing service, and make sure the foundation of it is love. And of the 4 loves, look through your life and love them all. Love the family God placed you among. especially if you haven't talked to them for years and you're a little distant from them. Find them, find that great store they love and reconnect, touch base, chat with them frequently, on the phone, not face to face. But do that, love people. If you've been given a romantic love in your life and a partner, love them. Love them with that patience and kindness that Paul talked about, not keeping a record of wrongs. A love that is faithful, a love that never fails. Find the people in your life who are great friends, who were your friends when you were a little kid, who are still friends with you, and connect. Do that stuff. Find the people in our church. Get the church directory. Thank you, Fran, for all your work putting it together. Ring them. Let's talk to one another. Let's love one another in really doable, safe, practical ways as this happens among us. And some don'ts. Avoid promises that are not yours. I've seen things on Facebook where loving Christian people have said things like, God will never let this happen. No weapon formed against us will stand. God will never let his people suffer with this virus. In the people of Israel, in the history, there was a time when God saved the city of Jerusalem and he showed the prophet angels all around it, and a great army came against them and they just turned around and left. And so a generation later, when a similar army came against them, all sorts of people said, it doesn't matter, we don't need to be afraid, God will protect the city, and they were wrong, the city fell. They were claiming for themselves a promise that wasn't given to them at all. Some of the things that I've seen on Facebook that loving and well-meaning Christian people have said is claiming promises that were not given to us. If God has given you a promise about your survival or about how he's going to treat you, you claim that and you stand on it. The promises of God are wonderful. But be wary about claiming promises that were not given to us in this time, in this context. I have yet to hear someone promise that no Christian people will die of coronavirus. I haven't heard that. Not from God. Be wary of the kinds of promises that you accept. And never forget. Never forget that God is in control. I know we don't have the worship team and we can't sing a song, but I wanted to just close today with some of the words of a great old hymn that offers us a blessed assurance. And it says this: blessed assurance, Jesus is mine. Oh, what a foretaste of glory divine, heir of salvation, purchase of God, filled with his goodness, lost in his love. This is our story. This is our song, praising the Saviour all the day long. Amen.